Marisa Jacobs is Managing Director at Xpatweb. Thank you very much, Marisa, for joining me this evening. I really appreciate your time. Just very, very quickly, for those people who might not know what the work of Xpatweb is, if you could please explain that so that we can establish relevance as to why I'm talking to you this evening.
Sure. Hi, Aubrey. Thank you so much for having me. So Xpatweb is an immigration service provider assisting large corporates and multinationals mostly in terms of facilitating work visas and the like in terms of visas for the foreign skilled workers to come into South Africa. And that is mostly what we do and other support services around expatriates in the country.
So you would have heard my conversation with Bernadette Wicks and the arguments that have been advanced by various parties in this case in our courts. I must also hasten to say that a few months ago, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, shall I call him the Foreign Affairs in Zimbabwe, was here in South Africa to say that, you know, Zimbabweans in South Africa and those that may possibly not win the battle as far as the ZEP is concerned are very welcome back to Zimbabwe, and they would be welcomed back with warm hands. Should ZEP holders believe the minister?
I think it's a very interesting question, and I think they will be welcomed back. I don't think that there's an issue in terms of going back. I think that the issue at hand is, what do you go back to, and what are the opportunities, and do you have family back in Zimbabwe, and how do you start over? And I think that is the situation that guys are grappling with in terms of returning.
So what happens? I mean, if government wins this case, most likely some people who have ZEP permits may have to go back to Zimbabwe if they don't have any explanation of certain circumstances that may, compel government to let them stay in South Africa. And then there might be those who have to stay under which circumstances? If government wins. But what happens if government loses? Will there still be some sort of compulsion for the regularization of documents? What can we expect in any of the scenarios?
I mean, I think if government wins, then obviously the situation as it is currently stands, and Zimbabwe Exemption Permit holders will need to apply for something before the 30th of June or depart. The minister has made it quite clear in all of these discussions that he has opened the door in terms of applying for mainstream visas. Your previous guest explained some of those categories: applying for work visa, applying for spousal visas, the children who are still in school can apply for study visas, etc. So there's many visa categories that would be applicable. And then the tougher ones would obviously be work visa categories that have very high threshold in terms of qualifying for those categories. And in those circumstances, the minister, again, he said, well, then, if you can't meet any of those thresholds, please apply to us for a waiver to explain your circumstances, explain your personal situation to us and where you're at, and why we should make an exception for you, as the department makes exceptions for many other people from other nationalities who also cannot meet certain requirements, and then apply for a waiver to be able to progress to a visa without meeting a specific requirement. So I do think even if the department does win the case, the opportunity has been extended to all ZEP holders not to depart, but to say, please get onto a mainstream visa where you can progress to permanent residency, a mainstream visa that gives you access to changing your status in country and all the other things that other foreign nationals on mainstream visas have access to in South Africa. So the Department of Home Affairs winning the court case does not mean all ZEP holders need to return back to Zimbabwe. It means all ZEP holders need to get onto a mainstream visa, please, before the expiry date. So I think that's very important to note. I do think that it's worth adding that if the Department of Home Affairs wins the case, I do believe that the various parties in the court cases will probably appeal the decision, and then we will again be in this uncertain turmoil of, well, what happens next? Do I now wait for the appeal to happen, or where do I go? Our view remains that you should make a proactive decision to get yourself onto a permit where you are not at the mercy of which way the court case is going to go.
That's quite interesting, Marisa. So you're saying to me there are remedies available to ZEP holders should government win that don't necessarily have to mean people having to be deported.
Absolutely. The minister is in all when the announcement was made that the ZEP concession will not be extended for a further period, that announcement went hand in hand with to say, guys, so if you're on a ZEP permit, in the past when you're on ZEP, you were not able to change your status. You were stuck on ZEP. If you wanted to apply for something different, you would have to return to Zimbabwe and make that application at the South African High Commission in Zimbabwe in order to return. The announcement that the concession would not be extended then said, we are opening up the opportunity for you to change your status in country and get onto a mainstream visa, please. That was the invitation. And then at the end of last year, when the expiry of the extension was nearing in December, the minister again made an announcement and said, we see not many of you have been applying for these mainstream visas. We're going to extend it for a further 6 months to allow more of you to apply. And if you feel you are not qualifying for one of these mainstream visas, please approach the department to ask for a waiver and explain your circumstances so that we may consider you personally and where you are at and what your situation is. So absolutely there's remedy, but we are not seeing a lot of ZEP holders taking up this. We've seen many take it up, but not quite the vast numbers that we were expecting.
Why, Marisa? I mean, if the message around the termination of the ZEP regime is, look, we're not saying you need to get out of the country. We're simply saying that you need to apply to get onto a more regulated mainstream visa so that we can do away with this blanket thing called the ZEP. Why would there be reticence, doubt, fear to apply for that? Is it because perhaps of the issue of the critical skills list that has now been put in place? And is it perhaps a matter of, I don't know, not trusting what government says from the minister? So in other words, I suppose what I'm asking is this out of the ordinary that a government would say, listen, there was this ZEP arrangement which was not permanent, which would not have allowed you to change your status to get onto any other visa arrangement, but now we are regulating that process, and it does not necessarily mean that you're going to leave. Why have people not applied? What are we missing here?
Yeah. I think there's a lot of false information out that make people fearful. I think I've been approached by a lot of people who want to apply, but they say they hear that the minister is not even considering waivers. They're just being automatically rejected, which is nonsense. We've seen no such rejections. The minister himself, when he was interviewed end of last week, said that he is in fact signing waivers for ZEP holders on a daily basis. He is considering them and he's signing them off and he is approving them. He confirmed as much when he was interviewed. So there's a lot of false information where people are fearful. They're worried if they come forward, they will be deported or that their application won't be successful. So I think there's a lot of fear out there. And to your other point, we do visas for the whole Africa continent and some other destinations. It is very difficult to get a visa anywhere. it is not easy to apply for a work visa in another country. There is a long list of requirements, and there is a big threshold to meet. South Africa is not unique.
Yeah, I mean, I heard the minister speak about that last week when he was being quizzed around the issue of the backlog of visas for people who qualify in terms of work visas because they qualify, in terms of that critical skills list, they qualify, but there are certain backlogs as a result of certain capacity issues. And of course, COVID and all of those things have been pointed to. He also pointed out that other countries have even bigger backlogs than South Africa has. So I remember that conversation with the minister. My question is this something out of the ordinary for a government to put out a policy decision to say that in terms of our immigration laws, we are now going to change certain aspect of it to regularize people? I mean, is this a uniquely South African situation that we are seeing here, or is this something that governments do all over the world?
Absolutely. Governments change their immigration acts and regulations all the time and introduce new systems and new. I mean, we're seeing it now. I mean, the president announced at the investment conference that South Africa will be easing our immigration requirements. A directive was released earlier today that to say that anyone who's applying for a visa from the 13th of April going forward no longer needs to submit a police clearance certificate from all the countries they've lived in since their 18th birthday. It's no longer required. You only now need to do it for the last 5 years. We no longer need to submit chest x-rays with your visa application. So there are at the same time, there is lots being done to make it easier to apply for a visa in South Africa. And other countries do exactly the same. They tighten in some areas and they loosen up in other areas. So it's not unusual.
There is a belief amongst friends of mine who are ZEP holders that the very issuing of the ZEP was a tacit sort of promise somehow of permanent residency, citizenship, naturalization in some way or another, because some have said to me that in other countries, if you have lived in that country for 5, 7 to 10 years, which is a point that Dave J on Twitter is making, you usually are then given citizenship or you're naturalized in that country. Is there any such tacit promise, perhaps unsaid promise, that was understood by ZEP holders?
In my view, not. If you look at a validly issued ZEP permit, as with any other visa in South Africa, there are conditions noted on that visa. So the actual individual visa issued to a person and endorsed in their passport has conditions on it. And one of the conditions on a ZEP permit is that you do not have the right to permanent residency. It is printed on each and every single ZEP permit that has been issued. You cannot change your conditions in country. You are allowed to work and study legally, and you do not have the right to progress to permanent residency under ZEP status. It's very clear there. And that is also one of the positions that the minister has put forward in his announcements talking around the ZEP regime, is to say when you then apply onto a mainstream visa, it gives you the opportunity to now progress to permanent residency. Please take up the opportunity to get on.
Because if you've got ZEP, you can't progress.
You can't progress. And I don't think that there's any uncertainty around that either, because of the way that the ZEP permit is endorsed.
Then there's the issue of the critical skills list. Many people are afraid to apply because they feel that they will not qualify in as far as the critical skills list is concerned. Many of the people who hold ZEP permits are, laborers and people who work in domestic sort of situations. The fear in some cases is that, listen, I don't qualify for the critical skills that are on that list, so I'm doomed. What about them?
So there's two categories there's more than two categories, but in this instance, there's two relevant categories of work in South Africa. There's the critical skills work visa, which is subject to that list of critical skills. And if you don't have a skill that's on that list and you don't have the accompanying qualification and N2F level that's been attached to it, you do not qualify for critical skills visa. The alternative category is a general work visa. Now, a general work visa requires that an employer would need to advertise for the position in South Africa to see if they cannot find a South African to fill that role. Or in the alternative, you would apply for a waiver to say, I'm not advertising for the position in South Africa because I'm hiring this specific person, and you would need to give reasons on why you are hiring that specific person. And that is one of the avenues that the minister has specifically opened up to say, please consider this category of visa if you are a labourer and you are working and you want to progress onto a mainstream visa.
Are ZEP holders who are reticent and fearful, many of whom, because of, I suppose, the lack of economic opportunities in Zimbabwe, in a tight spot here? I mean, what do you suggest they do, given all of these variables, the fear? But you seem to suggest that the fear is perhaps not as warranted as it has been made out to be. What are you suggesting they do?
My advice remains to all ZEP holders to explore the option of getting onto a mainstream visa. That is the invitation that the minister has made. He has made it clear that he is considering those. For the first time last week, in his interview, he has confirmed that he is signing off on those submissions that have been put forward, and that remains your avenue of certainty. Anything else, waiting for the court case, whether it goes in the direction of the Helen Suzman Foundation or in the department's direction, either way, we can expect an appeal. If the department loses, they will likely appeal. If the department wins, the Helen Suzman Foundation will likely appeal, and then you'll again be an uncertainty. The applying for a visa and getting yourself out of the Zimbabwe exemption regime, it gives you that certainty and gives you a path to the permanent residency that you desire.
What of the children, Marisa, that are born in South Africa to parents who hold ZEP? I mean, that really pulls at the heartstrings of many people, both Zimbabwean and South African, regardless of what position you hold in the politics of the matter. What of them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the children themselves would qualify for study visas where they are school going. But of course, you cannot be a child alone in South Africa on a study visa without parents. So it goes hand in hand to say that where the children are in need to apply for study visas, the parents obviously would need to apply for visas to also be able to legally remain in the country. So again, there's visa categories that would allow for them to do so, as long as their guardian or their parent is also able to apply for visa.
From the 180,000 odd people that have ZEPs, from your information, how many have applied thus far?
It seems to be a very closely guarded secret. It's a number that has not come forward before. The minister has not said. He has just said he initially had a number, but it was a very low number, a couple of thousand.
6,000 when I last spoke to him. Yeah.
Yeah, and he hasn't come forward with new numbers. I'm not aware that any numbers have been shared in the court cases of late, but I would expect that number would have gone up quite a bit. But I still think there's a very small percentage of the 178,000.
I'm going to put you on the spot, and if you don't want to be on the spot, you'll say no, I don't want to be on the spot. Which way do you think this thing's going to go?
I think it is going to be a very close call. I think the minister has put himself in a position where he has He has granted extension. He has granted additional extension. He's given the opportunity for other categories. He most certainly did not go on television last week and say the things that he said for no reason. I think they're making very strong arguments, but it could go either way. And because it can go either way, I do think that appeals are a very strong possibility and the uncertainty will remain.
Marisa Jacobs, thanks very much for joining me. How do people get in touch with you?
They're welcome to hop onto our website, www.xpatweb.com, and get in touch with us there. We also run the critical skills survey, which determines what goes onto the critical skills list. So if they go onto the website, they'll see that there as well.
Marisa Jacobs, Managing Director at Xpatweb. Thank you so much for joining us.